Nothing is wrong with you. Even if it feels like everything inside you is falling apart. Even if you don't recognize yourself anymore. Even if your old motivations don't work. Even if the life you once wanted no longer makes sense. This is not a malfunction. This is not failure. And it is not something that needs to be fixed. What you are experiencing is something far deeper. And far more misunderstood. Most people are taught that clarity should feel stable. That growth should feel empowering. And that becoming better should feel like improvement. But awakening rarely feels like progress at first. It feels like confusion. It feels like losing interest in things that once defined you. It feels like emotional sensitivity without a clear reason. It feels like questioning beliefs that once gave you comfort. And because no one prepares you for this phase, your mind reaches for the closest explanation it can find. It tells you something is wrong. That you're broken. That you're regressing. That you're losing your way. But awakening does not announce itself gently. It dismantles before it reveals. What's happening is not that you're losing yourself. It's that an old version of you is dissolving. A version built on adaptation. On expectations. On identities you learned to survive, not to live. And when those layers begin to loosen, the nervous system reacts. The mind looks for certainty. The ego looks for stability. And when it can't find them, it labels the experience as danger. But this discomfort is not a warning sign. It is a threshold. Awakening often begins the moment your inner world stops cooperating with the life you've been forcing. The moment your soul says, quietly but firmly, "This is no longer true for me." And because truth rarely aligns with convenience, the body feels unsettled. You may feel emotionally raw, disconnected, unmotivated in ways that scare you. You may feel like you're standing between two lives, unable to return to who you were, and unsure of who you're becoming. That in-between space is not a mistake. It is sacred. But most people rush through it. They numb it. They medicate it. They distract themselves back into familiarity. Because sitting in the unknown feels unbearable. When you believe something is wrong with you. But what if this discomfort is not a signal to go back, but an invitation to go deeper? What if the anxiety you feel is not weakness, but the friction between who you were taught to be and who you are now ready to become? Awakening doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with subtle grief. Grief for old certainties. Grief for identities that no longer fit. Grief for a life that made sense, but was never fully alive. And this grief is not something to escape. It is something to listen to. Because beneath it, there is clarity forming. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that explains everything. But the kind that whispers, "You are not broken. You are changing." And once you stop trying to fix yourself, you may begin to notice something surprising. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but it softens. It begins to guide rather than threaten. And what once felt like something going wrong starts to reveal itself as the beginning of something real. When something inside you begins to change, the first reaction is rarely peace. It is confusion. Because the mind is designed to protect what is familiar, not what is true. So when old motivations fade, when habits lose their grip, when identities stop giving you a sense of direction, the mind panics. It looks for labels. It asks, "What's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why don't I feel like I used to?" But awakening does not arrive with clear instructions. It arrives by removing what no longer fits. And removal always feels like loss, before it feels like freedom. This is why so many people misinterpret awakening as depression, failure, or regression. Because from the outside, it looks like stagnation. And from the inside, it feels like disorientation. But stagnation is numb. Awakening is alive. Even when it hurts. One of the first signs of awakening is a growing intolerance for what once felt acceptable. You may find yourself unable to fake enthusiasm. Unable to participate in conversations that feel hollow. unable to chase goals that no longer feel honest. This is not laziness. It is discernment emerging. Your nervous system is no longer willing to sacrifice authenticity for approval. And that shift is deeply unsettling. If your identity was built around adaptation for most of your life, you learn how to fit in, how to perform stability, how to earn belonging by becoming predictable. But awakening disrupts that agreement. It asks a dangerous question. What if the life you built was never aligned with who you are? That question doesn't come gently. It arrives as exhaustion, as emotional sensitivity, as the strange feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine. And because our culture is uncomfortable with uncertainty, this phase is quickly pathologized. You are told to fix it, to get back to normal, to return to productivity. But normal was often the problem. Normal was the mask. Normal was the compromise. Normal was the version of you that survived by disconnecting. Awakening is what happens when that disconnection becomes impossible. When your body refuses to cooperate with a life that requires you to abandon yourself. This is why awakening often begins in discomfort. Because comfort was built on misalignment. As awareness grows, the gap between who you are and how you live becomes impossible to ignore. And that gap creates friction. Not to punish you, but to redirect you. Awakening does not destroy your life. It reveals where your life was built on expectations instead of truth. And truth does not negotiate. It waits quietly until you are ready to listen. This is why you may feel drawn to silence, to solitude, to slower rhythms. Not because you are withdrawing from life, but because you are learning to hear yourself again. Noise maintains the illusion. Silence exposes what's real. And what's real can feel overwhelming when you've spent years numbing it. You may grieve during this process. Grieve relationships that no longer resonate. Grieve dreams that were never truly yours. Grieve the version of yourself that tried so hard to belong. This grief is not weakness. It is integration. You are reclaiming parts of yourself that were left behind to keep the peace. And that reclamation requires space. This is also why awakening can feel lonely. Not because you are alone, but because you are no longer synchronized with environments that once mirrored you. Your frequency is changing, and until your external world catches up, there is a sense of being in between. No longer who you were, not yet fully who you are becoming. This in-between space is sacred, but it is also misunderstood. Most people try to escape it. They rush to define themselves again. They grab new labels, new identities, new beliefs. But awakening cannot be rushed. Because it is not about becoming something new. It is about unbecoming what you were never meant to carry. And that process takes patience. It takes compassion. It takes the courage to sit with discomfort without assuming it means danger. Nothing is wrong with you. Your system is recalibrating. Your awareness is expanding beyond survival, beyond conditioning, beyond roles that once felt necessary. And expansion is uncomfortable because it breaks containment. The structures that once held you can no longer do so. And while that can feel like collapse, it is actually reorganization. A deeper intelligence is at work. One that does not seek efficiency, but coherence. One that does not care about appearances, but alignment. Awakening does not make you better than anyone else. It makes you more honest. And honesty can feel disruptive in a world built on performance. But this disruption is not something to fear. It is something to respect. Because once you stop trying to fix yourself, once you stop assuming discomfort means something is wrong, you create space for clarity to emerge naturally. Not as an answer, but as a way of being. A quieter way. A truer way. And from that place, life begins to reorganize itself around who you really are. Not who you were trained to be, If you are listening to this and something inside you feels seen, then pause for a moment. Not to analyze, not to explain, just to notice. Notice how your body reacts when you stop trying to understand yourself as a problem. Because for a long time, you were taught to measure your worth by how well you fit into systems that never asked who you truly were. So when awakening begins, the old measuring tools stop working. Productivity feels empty. Achievement feels hollow. Validation loses its sweetness. And that can feel frightening, if those things were once your anchors. But what is happening is not collapse. It is recalibration. Your inner compass is adjusting, away from external approval, and toward internal coherence. This is why you may feel less driven by urgency, and more guided by resonance, less motivated by pressure, and more drawn by meaning. The world may interpret this as losing momentum, but what you are actually losing is the need to perform. And performance was never the same as presence. You are learning how to be with yourself, without constant distraction, without chasing outcomes, without editing your emotions. And that is a rare skill in a world addicted to speed. As you settle into this new awareness, you may notice that answers come differently, not as loud revelations, but as quiet clarity, not as sudden certainty, but as a deepening sense of what no longer belongs. Awakening does not rush you forward. It asks you to slow down, until your life can catch up with your truth. And that requires trust. Trust that confusion is not failure. Trust that discomfort is not regression. Trust that losing old versions of yourself is not the same as losing your way. You are not lost. You are in transition. And transition is a space where nothing needs to be forced, only allowed. If you can give yourself permission to rest inside this uncertainty, something gentle begins to unfold. A relationship with yourself that is no longer based on correction, but on curiosity. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is trying to emerge?" That single shift changes everything. Because when you stop treating your inner world as an obstacle, it becomes a guide. And guides do not shout. They whisper. They reveal themselves slowly to those who are willing to listen. If this message resonated with you, let it stay with you for a while. You don't need to act on it. You don't need to define it. Just let it accompany you as you move through your days. Return to it whenever the doubt comes back. Because awakening is not a one-time event. It is a remembering that unfolds in layers. And each time you recognize yourself in that remembering, you come home a little more to yourself. And that is where the journey truly begins.